Your old British car is worth more than any price guide is going to tell you. And over the next half hour, I'm going to show you exactly where that worth actually sits. In a rolling exemption that hands you free road tax and no test certificate. In a survivor count that has quietly collapsed under everybody's noses. And in a tax rule that lets you keep every penny your car has gained without HMRC taking a slice. That's the deal. 3 things you own that a brand new car cannot buy at any price. But I want to be straight with you before we go a step further, because the word priceless does a lot of lying in this hobby. If priceless means worth a fortune, the market says no. Haggerty's Best of British Index, the one that tracks the DB5s and the MGBs and the ordinary British stuff in between, is sitting at its lowest reading since the index was created in 2018. Across their whole price guide, British markers took 9 of the 10 worst average falls in the 12 months to December 2025. And the Federation of British Historic Vehicle Clubs, who count these things properly, reckon the average historic vehicle in this country has slid from about £26,000 to £22,700 since the pandemic peak. So no. Your triumph is not a pension. What it is irreplaceable, and that's a completely different ledger. One that has been getting better for you every single year, while the auction results were getting worse. I've had the sills out of enough B-series shells, and cut enough rotten metal out of mini floors to know where the water sits before I lift the carpet. That's the only qualification I'll claim. 3 things I'm holding back for later. There is a number, 412, that tells you more about scarcity in this country than any auction hammer ever has, and I'll come to it. There's a single line in a 1992 Act of Parliament that quietly makes your car the most tax-efficient thing in your garage. And there's a government review happening this year that could take away the fuel your car actually wants, which nobody has warned you about. Let's start with what you're already entitled to and probably haven't claimed. Here's the thing, everybody gets muddled, and if we don't sort it out now, the rest of this makes no sense. There are 2 completely separate ledgers running on your car at the same time, and people keep reading the wrong one. Ledger 1 is market price, what somebody would hand you for it on a wet Tuesday. That's set by fashion, by interest rates, by who's retiring and selling up. And right now it's soft. In the first half of 2026, the British auction rooms were the most selective they've been in about a decade. The money is still there. It's just reading the estimates and the paperwork very carefully and walking away when they don't line up. Ledger 2 is replacement cost, not what somebody will pay you. What it would take to put another one exactly like it on the road if yours went under a lorry tomorrow. And that ledger only ever goes one way, because the number of them in existence can only fall. Nobody is pressing more 1971 shells. Nobody is training a fresh generation of men who can set up a pair of SU carburettors by ear. Think of a Victorian terrace where the brickwork shut down 60 years ago. You can still repair number 14, but every brick you use has to come off number 16. And when 16 is gone, it's gone. And the street is one house poorer forever. That's the classic parts economy in one sentence. Everything on your car that isn't still being made comes from another one of your car being taken apart. The old hands have understood that instinctively for decades. It's why the fellow at the club stand has a shelf of parts he'll never use and won't sell you. What's changed is that the state has started, almost by accident, to agree with him. The law now treats a car over 40 as a piece of national furniture rather than a nuisance to be taxed off the road. That's not sentiment. It's written down, and it has a cash value you can calculate this afternoon. And the people are getting scarcer faster than the cars. The Federation's latest national survey puts the sector at a record £7.3 billion a year and around 34,500 skilled jobs. Sounds robust. Then you read the next line. The average owner is now in their 60s. The vehicles are outlasting the knowledge, and that's the part nobody has worked out how to fix. Right. The exemptions. Let's do the arithmetic properly, because I hear a lot of nonsense about this, and there's real money in getting it right. Vehicle excise duty first. If your car was built before the 1st of January 1986, you can stop paying road tax from the 1st of April 2026. That's the rolling 40-year rule, and it moves on every April. Built at any point during 1986, and you're waiting until April 2027. So it behaves more like a rolling 41 years in practice, which catches people out. There's a useful quirk too. If the build date is unknown, but the car was first registered on or before the 7th of January 1986, the DVLA will treat it as a 1985 car and you're in. Built and first registered are not interchangeable terms, and the distinction matters mostly for imports. What's that worth? Pre-2001 cars sit on an old two-tier system, about £230 a year, up to 1549cc, about 375 above it. So a Stag or a Big Rover is handing you back the best part of £400 a year for the rest of your life, index-linked, for one afternoon of admin. And it is admin. This does not happen by itself. By the way, if you want to keep your car running for as long as possible without wasting money on unnecessary garage bills, I put together a guide called the 500k Mile Car Care Bible. It covers 101 habits that can help your car last longer, the warning signs you should never ignore, and how to spot unnecessary repairs and garage upsells before they cost you a fortune. To get your copy, just scan the QR code on screen with your phone's camera, or use the first pinned comment below. You have to apply to move the car into the historic tax class, and the first time you do it at a post office with the V5C in your name. Sit there, waiting for the DVLA to notice your car's birthday, and you'll get a tax demand instead. You also still have to tax it every year, even though the rate is 0, and you still have to insure it. £0 is a price, not an absence. Second, the test. Since the 20th of May 2018, a vehicle more than 40 years old can be declared exempt from the MOT using the V112 declaration when you tax it. But, and this is the bit people skate over, only if it hasn't been substantially changed in the previous 30 years. Chassis, body shell, axles, or an engine changed in a way that alters how the vehicle works, and you're outside it. Like for like, replacements don't count against you, nor does a shell of the same design as original, nor changes made for safety or efficiency. A Dolomite Sprint on its original 2-litre is exempt. The same car with a fuel-injected V6 and a different back axle is not. And here's the part I'd nail to the garage wall. The declaration is made by you, the DVLA does not inspect anything, and the legal responsibility for that car being roadworthy stays with you every single mile. No exemption from brakes working. I still put mine through a test voluntarily, and I'd suggest you consider it. Not because the law says so, but because a fresh pair of eyes under the car once a year is cheap insurance against the thing you've stopped seeing. Third, and this has quietly become the biggest cash difference of the lot, clean air zones. Any vehicle registered in the historic tax class is exempt from London's ULEZ, and anything built before the 1st of January 1973 is exempt regardless. Same principle in the charging zones in Birmingham, Bristol, Bath and the Scottish city schemes. Historic vehicles fall outside them. A non-compliant modern car pays £12.50 a day in London. Your 1978 Spitfire pays nothing all day, every day. Two honest caveats. The congestion charge is a separate animal, and classics are not exempt from it, whatever their age. And the Federation have warned for years that the online vehicle checker is unreliable and will sometimes flag an exempt classic as chargeable. If that happens, it's a paperwork fight, not a bill. All of it also depends on the car not being used commercially. Wedding hire, taxi work, a van doing a trade, and the historic class does not apply. Something I've never seen properly explained, and I've looked why 40 years. Much of continental Europe works to 30, which is the definition the International Historic Vehicle Federation recommends, and the Federation here has argued for it. When Transport for London were asked why their exemption sat at 40, the answer was essentially that they follow the Treasury's excise exemption, which is a process, not a reason. My honest read is that 40 was a number chosen in 2014 to replace a frozen cut-off date, and nobody has ever had to justify it since. If you know different, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Now the number I promised you. 412. That's how many Morris Marinas were still licensed on British roads at the last count, from Department for Transport licensing data, plus 67 Eatles. This was a car British Leyland sold by the hundreds of thousands. It was street furniture. It was the most ordinary object in Britain, and there are now fewer of them than there are people in a decent-sized village hall. There was an auction in Norfolk this August with 5 marinas in it, and that single sale briefly held over 1% of the entire national population of the model. Set that against what was built. 642,000 Austin Allegros. Over 2 million of the 1100s and 1300s that came before them, Britain's best-selling car for years at a stretch. Over 500,000 MGBs. The attrition rate on ordinary British cars isn't a percentage, it's a wipeout. And the survivors got eaten twice, once by rust and again by owners of prettier cars raiding them for parts. A marina donated its running gear to miners and MGBs for 50 years. I don't want to overstate a number I can't fully stand behind. The licensing data sites are the best public source we have, but they undercount. The MG V8 register knows of nearly 2,000 surviving factory MGB GT V8s, where the public data shows a few hundred. Cars on Sawn, cars in barns, cars registered under a mistyped model name from a 1974 dealer's handwriting. None of them show up cleanly. So take the survivor figures as a flaw, not a head count. The direction is not in doubt, the precision is. And the scarcity is not natural. That's the part that should annoy you. And we'll come back to it, because a big chunk of it was paid for out of your taxes. One more thing on rarity, because it cuts both ways. Rare and valuable are not the same word. Haggerty's own list of good buys for 2026 has a Vauxhall Viva at around £4,300 in excellent condition, and a MK1 Transit at about £17,200. One of those is a car and one is a van, and the van is worth 4 times the car. Scarcity sets the floor, desire sets the price. Your marina is a genuine survivor, and it is still a marina. You're still with me, which suggests you've got one of these in the garage, or you're about to. If the channel's useful to you, subscribe. That's the whole ask. Because next, I want to talk about the single most extraordinary fact in British motoring, which is that you can still buy a brand new body for a car that went out of production before Thatcher's second term. In a shed in Witney, in Oxfordshire, there is a company called British Motor Heritage that has been pressing complete body shells for classic British cars since 1988, using the original factory press tooling and assembly jigs. They started with the MGB, 8 years after the last one was built. Then midget bodies, then TR6s, then Minis and Clubmans, and they were a British Leyland subsidiary, got swept up when BMW bought Rover, were sold off in 2001 and have quietly carried on being the largest operation of their kind anywhere in the world. Sit with that for a second. Your car, 40 or 50 years old, can have a brand new body, not a repair panel. A whole shell supplied with doors, wings, bonnet and boot lid hung on it, primed and ready to paint. Try that with a 15-year-old hatchback, and you'll get a laugh from the parts desk. Now the honest part. It is not cheap, and it is not perfect. The ballpark I'd work to is that shell plus paint alone will cost you around £10,000. Treat that as a rough figure rather than a quote, because it moves with steel prices and the batches are built to order. And people who've done it will tell you the panel fit needs fettling, because the tooling is the original tooling, with all the tolerances of a 1960s Cowley production line baked in. Here's the bit I find genuinely clever, though. The new pressings use better corrosion protection than the factory ever managed, but the design still promotes rust because the design hasn't changed. Same water traps, same box sections that fill from the top and drain nowhere. So the trick isn't the steel, it's what you do before you build. Ventilate the traps, seal the cavities, get wax into the sills before the carpets go in. Do that, and you can push the next rebuild out by decades. Which brings me to why these cars rot in the first place. Because most people have it backwards. It isn't that the metal was thin, it's that a monocoque car has no chassis. The sills, the floors, and the inner arches are the structure. They carry the loads, and the factory put drain paths through them and then sealed the ends with paint. Mud packs into the box section from the wheel. Stays wet for 9 months of a British winter, and the corrosion works outward from the inside where you cannot see it. By the time a bubble shows on the paint, the strength has already gone. That's why a shiny car can fail catastrophically and a scruffy, dry one can be sound. If you take one practical thing from this whole video, take this. Rust on a British monocoque is a structural fault reporting itself late. Judge the car on the metal you can't see, not the paint you can. And then there's the reason all of this is even possible, which is the design philosophy itself. You can diagnose almost anything on a car of this era with a timing light, a set of feeler gauges, a multimeter, and your ears. There is no proprietary handshake, no dealer-only software, no module that has to be married to the car by somebody with a subscription. Points, condenser, dynamo or alternator, mechanical pump, a carburettor with a float chamber you can look inside. Every system is visible, and every system announces itself before it fails. The misfire that comes in under load, the whine that changes with road speed, the smell of hot oil 10 minutes before the leak shows on the drive. And the people who drew these cars were not fools, which is a thing modern owners forget when they're swearing at a Lucas connector. Issigonis packaged 4 adults and their luggage into 10 feet of Mini by turning the engine sideways and putting the gearbox in the sump. A solution so good the whole world copied it and is still copying it. The E-Type launched in 1961 at £2,098 for the Roadster, somewhere around £47,000 in today's money, for a car that would embarrass things costing 3 times as much. That wasn't luck. That was engineers being clever with no money, which is the most British form of engineering there is. Where they fell down was rust-proofing, quality control, and industrial relations, and no amount of affection changes that. But the bones were honest, and honest bones can be maintained by an ordinary person in an ordinary garage for an ordinary sum. That is the actual asset here. Quick one, and it's short because it's simple. Your folder is worth money. Old MOT certificates, the receipt from the man who rebuilt the axle in 1997, the original handbook, the photographs of it in bits. In this market, paperwork is the difference between 2 identical cars selling and one of them sitting unsold. Buyers in 2026 are paying for documented provenance and walking away from cars where the story doesn't add up. Your folder costs nothing to keep and cannot be recreated after you're gone. Put it in a box file, not a carrier bag. Now, the line in the Act of Parliament I promised you. Under Section 263 of the Taxation of Chargeable Gains, Act 1992, a private motor car is not a chargeable asset. HMRC's own manual spells it out. Any vehicle constructed or adapted to carry passengers isn't chargeable unless it's of a type not normally used as a private vehicle, and it says in terms that this includes vintage cars of that type. which means if you bought a tired E-Type for 30,000 and sold it years later for 80, the gain is outside capital gains tax entirely, not sheltered, not deferred, outside. There's nothing else in a normal person's garage that behaves like that, and the reason it exists is almost funny. Cars are treated as wasting assets, things with a limited life, because the revenue assumed they'd all go down in value. Most do. Yours might not. Now the limits, and I'd rather give you these than let you find them the hard way. The exemption does not cover taxicabs, racing cars, single-seaters, vans, lorries or commercial vehicles, and it does not cover motorcycles. A lot of bike owners assume it does. It falls away if the vehicle's been used in a business and capital allowances were or could have been claimed. Buy and sell often enough with the intention of profit, and HMRC may treat you as trading, at which point it's income, not a gain. And there is no equivalent break on inheritance tax. A car collection sits in your estate like anything else. I'm a spanners man, not an accountant. That is my reading of published HMRC guidance and nothing more. And if real money hangs on it, pay someone qualified for an hour of their time. 2 more things before we get to the part that'll annoy you. Fuel. Since September 2021, standard unleaded in this country has been E10, up to 10% ethanol, and your car doesn't want it. Ethanol attacks the rubber, the plastics, and some of the alloys in an old fuel system. It absorbs water, which matters enormously if the car sits over winter. And because each ethanol molecule carries its own oxygen, it leans the mixture out, which on a hot day with a hard-working engine is not nothing. The numbers on hose alone tell the story. The old R6 grade rubber that carburettor cars were plumbed with Let's ethanol through at something like 40 times the rate of modern R9. That's why fuel lines that were fine for 30 years suddenly weep. The protection is super unleaded, 97 octane and above, which was kept at E5 as a protection grade, plus a decent ethanol-inhibiting additive at every fill, which the Federation recommends because you can't be certain what corrosion inhibitor is already in the pump fuel. And here's the loop I left open. That protection grade was never promised forever. The government committed to review it 5 years after E10 arrived, and that review is due this year. Nobody I've read knows what comes out of it. The optimistic case is that low ethanol sustainable petrol now exists and could replace E5 with something even better for your car. The pessimistic case is that E5 quietly becomes harder to find at the sort of forecourt you actually pass. My honest suspicion, and I'm flagging it as suspicion, is that availability erodes at the small sites long before any rule changes. So the answer is to know which pumps near you carry super and stop assuming. Second thing, and this one's reassurance rather than warning, the 2030 date does not apply to you. New pure petrol and diesel cars stop being sold from 2030. All new cars and vans have to be zero emission from 2035, and the mandate driving it is aimed squarely at manufacturers. None of it bans your car, your fuel, or your right to sell it on. There is no plan to take a taxed, insured, roadworthy old car off the road, and anybody telling you otherwise is either confused or enjoying themselves. Which brings us to the thing I've been holding back, because they didn't need to ban your car. They already paid to have it crushed, and half the money came out of your pocket. May 2009. The scrappage scheme. You brought in a car more than 10 years old that you'd owned for at least a year, and you got £2,000 off a new one. 1,000 of that was public money. The other 1,000 came from the manufacturer selling you the replacement. By the time the £400 million pot was empty, 392,227 cars had gone to the crusher. Now read the eligibility rules again, slowly, because they're the whole indictment. Your car had to have a valid MOT. It had to be roadworthy. It had to have been yours for a year, so it couldn't be a £100 banger bought for the purpose. Every condition in that scheme was designed to guarantee that the cars destroyed were working, tested, useful vehicles that somebody had cared for. The published list is a roll call. Over 150 Minis, 14 2CVs, MG Midgets, an XJS V12, a 928, a Corvette. When enthusiasts asked whether the good ones could be pulled out and saved, the answer was no. By then, they legally belonged to the scrap dealers. Here's the arithmetic somebody did on your behalf and didn't show you. You were offered £2,000 for a car that in plenty of cases was worth well over £2,000 on the open market. You weren't being compensated, you were being given a discount, and half of that discount was a marketing spend by the company whose showroom you were standing in the worst year for new car sales in living memory. The industry was on its knees, and the public purse was used to persuade you that the working car on your drive was the problem. Then there's the green case, which was the sales pitch. Scrappage schemes assume the new car is cleaner than the old one and stop the sum right there. They don't count the emissions of building the new car, they don't count the emissions of destroying the old one, and studies of these schemes have found a strikingly high cost per tonne of pollution actually avoided. Meanwhile, the vehicles being crushed were the low-mileage, occasional use end of the fleet. Historic vehicles account for around 0.2% of all miles driven in Britain. You cannot make a meaningful dent in air quality by destroying the cars nobody drives. You can, however, shift a lot of metal off a forecourt, and the cost landed years later on you in a form nobody wrote down at the time. An entire generation of ordinary cars was removed from the supply, the exact cars that would now be 20 and 30-year-old classics, the parts donors, the affordable first classic for somebody's kid. Every quote you get for a used panel today has that scheme in it somewhere. I'm not telling you this to make you angry about 2009. I'm telling you because the same offer will come round again, dressed as clean air or a trade-in bonus or a targeted grant, and it will arrive with a number attached that sounds generous until you've priced the car yourself. You now know the trick. They will offer you a discount and call it a value. Price the car first, then look at the offer. That sentence won't work on you again. There's a reason this matters beyond money. And it's not nostalgia. A skill only survives while it's being used. Somebody has to want a distributor set up properly for anyone to still know how. Somebody has to want a wing let in with a lead-loaded seam for that to stay in living memory rather than a book. Every one of these cars still on the road is a reason for a man in a unit on an industrial estate to keep doing something that took him 20 years to learn. And a reason for someone in their 20s to stand next to him and watch. The Federation's numbers say the same thing from a different angle. Nearly 2,700 specialist businesses, and nearly half of them now running or planning apprenticeships. Owners averaging in their 60s. The cars will outlast the people easily. The knowledge won't, unless it's handed over deliberately. That's what priceless actually means here, and it's got nothing to do with hammer prices. Money can rebuild a car. It cannot rebuild the ability to rebuild a car. Right? What to actually do. In order. 1. Get the V5C out and find the build, or first registration date. Before the 1st of January 1986 means free road tax from April this year, and you must apply in person first time at a post office. Do it this month. 2. Decide about the winter honestly. If nothing substantial has been changed in 30 years, you can declare exemption on the V112 when you tax it. I'd still get it tested, and I'd still be the one legally on the hook either way. 3. Confirm your clean air zone position and keep the tax class paperwork with the folder because the checkers get it wrong. 4. Sort the fuel, super unleaded, an ethanol inhibitor at every fill, and if the flexible lines haven't been replaced this century, replace them with modern ethanol-rated hose. That's a cheap job that stops a fire. 5. Insure it on an agreed value with a valuation you can evidence and revisit it. A standard market value settlement is decided by an engineer pricing metal, and rarity often isn't in his calculation at all. 6. And this is the one to write down because it's the decision that actually costs people money. Should you restore it, or is it a project you're pretending is an investment? Don't use a rule of thumb, run the numbers. Find out 3 things: what a genuinely good one of yours has actually sold for recently, not what one is advertised at. What your car is worth as it stands, honestly, with the paint you can see and the metal you can't, and a real written figure for the metalwork from somebody who has put it on a ramp. Then compare. If the metalwork bill is bigger than the gap between those 2 values, you are buying the car twice, and that's fine, but say it out loud as a purchase rather than an investment, because the market is not going to hand it back to you. Here's what I'd do tonight if it were me. Go out with a torch and a phone. Photograph the V5C, the insurance schedule, the chassis plate, and the numbers on it. Then get underneath and photograph the sills, the inner arches, the floors, and the boot floor properly with the light low. Half an hour. By the end of it, you'll know whether you own an asset or a project. You'll have the evidence for an agreed value, and you'll have the only record of your car's condition that exists anywhere. Now, the comment I actually want, and it's a confession. Tell me about the one you let go, the Capri you sold for 400 quid, the Minor you gave your brother-in-law, the car you put through scrappage in 2009 because £2,000 was £2,000 and the sills had gone. What was it? What did you get for it, and what would it be worth now? No judgment from me. I've made a decision like that, and I still think about it. Those replies are the most useful thing on this channel, because somebody reading them this week is about to make the same call. If this was worth your time, subscribe. That's it. And I'll tell you what, I deliberately walked past today because it deserves its own hour. That phrase, substantially changed. There's a whole grey zone where restoration stops being restoration and the car becomes, in the DVLA's eyes, something else, where a registration can be lost and a Q plate arrives and thousands of pounds of value evaporates with it. I keep running into owners who have no idea how close to that line their rebuild is sitting. And I'm still working out where the line genuinely falls rather than where the forums say it does. When I've got it straight, I'll bring it. Until then, get the tax sorted, keep the folder dry, and go and start it before Sunday. They don't like standing.